Mike, I was prepared. I had visions. I went so far as to set aside a hidden savings account for our once-in-a-lifetime imaginary trip around the world that we planned to take in a few years. As my wife of 23 years was chatting with a handful of coworkers at her small college's annual staff meeting in mid-September, I observed her blushing intensely and continued to blush afterward when I noticed my wife's reactions. She was chatting ostentatiously with another group of her coworkers. I was standing there about 50 feet away earlier. I had been introduced to RAFCI Associate Professor of English Literature, Tracy, chatting with him, and another administrative assistant, Janet Barn. There could only be one explanation for Tracy's coloring, especially its persistent hue. She was extremely sexually stimulated. It made sense given that the college was Christian, and so I didn't think either of the other two would have made an offensive remark that could have answered a question I hadn't even thought to ask. Even if you don't pay attention, you learn pretty much everything about your spouse after 23 years of marriage and 25 years of living together well, if you're really engaged, okay? I knew all the signs of Tracy as a gambler would say the signs of her sexuality. I was convinced I was married to the perfect woman. Only 10 minutes ago, I was starting to understand some strange behaviors of my wife that I hadn't recognized as such. Until that very moment, we had wonderful children and were best friends and lovers with Tracy. We are one of those rare couples who can stay in each other's company for days without getting bored. Laughter was a common component of most of our conversations, which could be about topics as varied as sex and history. I used to think that an car ride with a future spouse was the best way to see if you were compatible as a married couple. If you come out of it unscathed, you should get married immediately. This description was entirely accurate for Tracy and I. I thought our sex life was fantastic, although it had cooled down after the tumultuous passion of our engagement and first marriage. It had picked up again when our youngest daughter had gone off to university the year before. We alternated between swinging and passionate 3 or 4 times a week, as being single parents for most of the year had rekindled our voracious appetites. We were both in excellent physical shape by the age of 45, as we worked out regularly. Tracy had long blonde hair, a generous bust, and a multitude of curves. She looked comfortable in her own skin, even though she weighed about 15 pounds heavier than when we saw our children compared to when I graduated. I had gained 20 pounds of muscle. I also had 25 years of experience using my fingers and mouth to please my wife 2 months ago. Something changed, and I wasn't going to let a hobby horse get me down, because things had improved. I wasn't even going to think twice about it. Tracy never sat still while we made love, but she rarely took the initiative. And then all of a sudden she took the initiative as much as I did, and the level of physical exertion was just fucks. But now, it was just sex. Even though it was fantastic, our attention shifted to the moment. I didn't think much about it in hindsight. I realized it was a bad decision. Tracy and RAF stayed in a radius 1.50 meters apart from each other the entire time we were out, except when I was helping her mix. From what I could see, I deduced that Tracy's glow activated whenever she was near Raf, regardless of my presence. As soon as Tracy moved away from me, she found a mixing buddy, but he usually disappeared as soon as I arrived. Even if I didn't make much effort, I would secretly watch the couple for the entire duration of the event. When RF was present, Tracy seemed to ignore everyone else during the entire event. I didn't notice her looking around once, as if she was trying to find her partner. She took every opportunity during the evening to gently touch him once I was certain of what I was seeing. My emotions changed from fear and to mild nervousness to intense fury from what I saw. It seemed like my marriage was coming to an end. I almost had to withdraw my wife about Raf's presence around 11 a.m. When I arrived and informed her that we had to leave, she didn't seem pleased. Her expression went from angry to calm in an instant, but not fast enough for me to notice the change. The subject of 23-year marriage came up normally. We would have talked non-stop about our night on the way home, but I voluntarily sat in silence, waiting for Tracy's to start. She stared out the passenger window for what seemed like an eternity, seemingly absorbed, until she finally noticed the unsettling silence. She then launched into an insignificant remark about the university president's wife's poor taste in clothing. I didn't say anything back. "I'm really exhausted. I'm going to get some rest," remarked Tracy when we get home. "Are you coming?" I couldn't figure out if she wanted me to go to bed so I wouldn't be horny all night or she was just trying to avoid talking for the rest of the night, either way. I told her I was going to sit down and watch TV. I noticed she seemed disappointed. I was able to spend all day Saturday tending to the garden, which allowed me to relax and gather my thoughts because it was the next day. Stage fright did a fantastic job of containing her cynicism about the reality of our world over the next week. The tension in the house seemed to be rising. I pretended not to worry, but I checked Tracy's whereabouts 6 times a day, using the Find Phone app on my iPhone, and she was always exactly where she was supposed to be. It turned out she didn't mind having sex in the evening. The first night she was more subtle. I did my best to please her fully on Monday. Nothing changed, but on Tuesday, I found out Tracy had gone home for lunch, thanks to the Find Phone app. I silently entered my house 15 minutes later, to make sure my marriage was over, thanks to their boisterous behavior in our bedroom. I didn't have to sneak upstairs to check that RAF was indeed Tracy's mate. "Oh my RAF!" Tracy screamed, "Oh God, baby, you are the best." I was in so much pain after that, I almost went into the room and throat that bastard on pure impulse. But I refrained from entering the room because I was ready to beat him mercilessly until he died. If I did, they were both unworthy of a prison sentence. Stage fright. Yes, this may sound narcissistic, but the truth is, I adore my husband more than anything for 25 years. I adored him. My deepest desire, dear, was to keep him close to me for another 25 years, so that everyone would know. I also had to confess that I had an extramarital affair. My ex-girlfriend was so amazing, I couldn't bear to let him go. But I know I should. If I want to save my marriage, my wonderful husband Mike would be devastated to find out I was seeing someone else. That's why. I did everything I could to hide my affair, but I didn't naively believe I would escape detection forever. The longer it went on, the more there was that I would be apprehended since we first met 25 years ago. Mike was my rock. Our marriage lasted 23 years and 3 months, and we were blessed with 2 amazing children. From best friend to Amsor to the fantastic sex partner. He's been through it all. We've talked about every subject imaginable. We've laughed often. Finally, until recently when I met RAF here for the first time, I had no intention of taking a lover. He walked into the administration building a few days before school started, and I am not exaggerating when I say that my life was turned upside down. RAF, a 30-year-old robust with short brown hair and kind gray eyes, was 6'2" tall and had a healthy build. Despite his good looks, he did not have the charisma of George Clooney. I spent the rest of the day brooding, because RAF kept running through my head, even though we were engaged. There was no way I was going to tell him I had someone else on my mind the next 2 weeks. We made love with Mike until we passed out on Wednesday. When my beloved husband had left town for a sleepover, I had the opportunity to do so. Knowing that it was bad, I was so nervous I was shaking when I contacted RAF on Monday and invited him to lunch on Wednesday. As RAF had no classes scheduled for Wednesday, I decided to take the day off to do some admin work. We had a nice lunch together, seemed talking and laughing a lot. After RAF joined me in a small Italian place, I couldn't help but giggle and touch his arms and hands as we talked on our first date. I felt very awkward and blushing. 5 minutes after sitting down at the table, my underwear was completely soaked. RAF was aware of my impatience, even though we had never talked about sex. He responded to my smiles with many more, held my hand for a while and smiled from time to time. I could see he felt the same way. Gentleman RAF paid the bill and asked, "Where are we going?" "My place. I live 10 minutes from here. Leave your car here, and I will drive you." And I replied with an air of confidence, "Well gone." I must admit, I was still anxious about the next event, even though I knew Mike would not be home. Not until Thursday night was I aware that my physical appearance was not what RAF was probably used to after having 2 children and turning 45. For some reason, I felt no remembrance for what I was about to do when I should have done it. No matter how much I loved Mike, I knew I would spend time with RAF and not let guilt stop me from having fun. As soon as I parked my car in the garage, I closed the door. The next 10 hours were some of the most memorable of my life. I had an incredible connection with RAF, and it seemed he felt the same. Mike had always been the perfect sexual partner for me, even though I wasn't a virgin. When we met, the scale was completely calibrated by RAF. He was as tall and stocky as Mike, but he was completely out of proportion to everyone's point of view. Our intimate relations were filled with pleasure and the desire to kill pleasure. Everything was G. I had lost count of the number of ecstasies I had felt during the day. But when RAF jumped into an Uber to go get his car, I felt as weak and stupid as a sponge. If I remember well, there was a lot of crying and screaming, and I'm pretty sure it was me. But I can't be sure. I wouldn't have dared to swear alone. I wanted more than that. As we shared our last kiss of the day, RAF enthusiastically declared, "You are an extraordinary woman." Stage fright, this was probably the best sex of my life. RAF, when Rasim McGowan called me, I knew what she was up to when we first met in the admin building weeks ago. I could see her reaction after lunch. I had the feeling that we would eventually do each other. Even though she never mentioned it directly, the woman had a beautiful face, a generous bosom, and long blonde hair, so it was obvious that she was a MILF. She could be a little curvier, but I wouldn't turn that down for anything. The rings on a woman's fingers are the first thing that caught my attention. But I realized that it didn't necessarily mean she was single anyway. I found that married women are the best. They usually have more life experience, and anything even slightly out of the ordinary drives them wild after a delicious lunch. She took me to her place where we spent most of the afternoon enjoying her marital bed. We made love all day long, as her partner was obviously only in town for the day compared to the other women I had been with. She turned out to be the most physically responsive. She was the Pooja of my sexual experience. So far as I walked back to my vehicle in the restaurant parking lot, I wished there were more days like this as my Uber driver took me away. Mike, the level of lying that Rasi was capable of, astounded me. The following week, she continued to embody the ideal wife as I quietly prepared for our impending divorce. As I met with the lawyer the following Wednesday morning, she informed me that Traces would be served the following Wednesday. I nevertheless filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery, even though we lived in a state where there was no fault. I realized that this is insignificant. I don't even understand how I could have pushed my wife into the arms of another man, or was it because he was about 15 years younger than me and could have sex more often? And it wasn't a drunken story. In case I needed further proof, Tracy had come home on her lunch break 3 more times in the last 10 days after the Fair application. I didn't feel it necessary to come home to find out that Tracy wasn't going to have cheese sandwiches for dinner. This concept made me laugh a little. At the time, I was looking for a pack of cinnamon brown sugar Pop-Tarts in our candy cabinet, but I couldn't find any. I had eaten the second to last pack the night before, so I knew there were none left, but a great RAF was sleeping with my wife and eating my snacks. I knew Tracy wouldn't touch them because Pop-Tarts are her worst enemy. How hose, Lee Tracy. I had my best sex ever on Thursday, and I felt like $1,000,000 when I woke up. It makes sense that I would feel guilty, but the truth is, I wanted more before I contacted RAF. I said my goodbyes until noon. My husband is not supposed to come back before 9 a.m. If you came right after I left at 5 a.m., we would have time to do another round, or even 2, and I jokingly say, "Gnaw your car in the garage." I love women who have a great sense of self-motivation, RAF replied. As soon as I heard Raf's car pull into the garage, I practically lubed up. My only certainty is that I was completely naked when he entered the house. RAF exclaimed, "I'm so glad you called our first attempt at making love slowly and passionately. Missionary was a failure, no matter how many times I tried it. Worked perfectly every time around 7:30 p.m. RAF left after only 2 days in the same bed. I took off the covers and changed the sheets to make everything organized. I placed both sets of sheets at the bottom of the laundry basket as I jumped in the shower. I felt wonderful. Well, after 90 minutes, Mike came into the building. I kissed my husband with all my might after my time out of time was over. My heart belonged to this man. But when Mike practically pushed me into the bedroom to get some affection, I have to admit I felt a little guilty. Until that day, I had never experienced making love to 2 men in the space of 1 day. It was unbearably hot for me, honestly, under my breath. I whispered, "This was fantastic, Mike." As we snuggled up against each other for our second night together, I had intended this all along. Mike was a fantastic lover on his own, but my relationship with Raf was absolutely phenomenal compared to what Mike and I usually do. I felt like we were doing something completely different, doing something so incredible me would completely take the guilt out of having sex with RAF was in my eyes. different from my married life, unlike RAF who focused on incredible physical sensations. Mike's sex was all about emotion. We did it twice a week. I was ready to enjoy the experience as long as I could, knowing it couldn't last forever. Mike, it was Wednesday at 10 a.m. that I found out that Tracy was going to get her divorce papers. It was a good few minutes before my phone rang. She was sobbing into the phone as I answered, "No. Mike, I don't want a divorce and I don't want to have a cheating wife. But you don't always get what you want. Do you?" I told him. "I can explain. I've made a decision for myself, a decision we need to talk about," started quietly crying. "No, we don't need to talk about your decision since you ignored our wishes. I also made a decision for myself," and I replied in the middle of the discussion. "The truth is, I did a lot of things at work. I was prepared for what I was going to encounter when I got home, and Tracy certainly didn't disappoint me. As soon as I walked into the house, Tracy yelled at me, 'Don't you think you owe me a talk before you filed for divorce? After all, we've been married for 23 years. Why didn't those 23 years seem to matter to you when you cheated on me repeatedly?' And I replied Tracy had clearly sobbed, as evidenced by her smudged makeup and tear-stained eyes. No, I wasn't exactly in a happy mood either. I love you, Mike. I love you, Mike. What I had with Raf was just physical. I finished her sentence for her, a decision for yourself. And I said the least we can say is Tracy seemed agitated. I'm sorry for hurting you, but I think you're exaggerating. We can talk about it. Said the woman, I don't see how, Tracis, you've been cheated on several times. Probably a lot more than I know. I commented. I know it has bad effect, Mike, but I know Tracy. It was just a personal decision. I insisted once more. Why don't you explain this to me? I'm sure Tracy understood that I was being sarcastic, but she smiled, seemed encouraged by my answer. I can't explain it, but it's like we have a special physical connection. He turns my legs to jelly when he's near me, and that's concluding. I said, the best sex you've ever had. I heard for the first time she looked terrified, and her eyes got as big as saucers. She asked, did you hear, with a mixture of fear and tears in her eyes? Do you want me to play it back for you? I was in the house last week. You were so busy making a mistake you didn't hear me. I could never undo that mistake. At least she could look down from Jen. It was purely physical. Mike, I love you. I can't. You say how much I love you. Can't we at least try to see a psychologist? I know I hurt you, but I know you still love me. What hurt me the most was that she was right about the last part. Despite my feelings for her diminishing compared to the previous SM, my affection for her remains unchanged. A love that lasts 25 years, doesn't die out quickly, stage fright. Even though I was aware of the risks involved, I was still disconcerted. When one Wednesday afternoon I received the divorce papers at my workplace. I didn't know that Mike knew about my affair. Not only did he know, but he had also apparently filmed Raf and me in bed. At one point, the worst part was that he heard me praising Raf, saying he was the best thing that ever happened to me. Oh no, I was convinced that Mike's love for me would triumph over my inability to adequately describe to my husband our connection to RAF. I would first try to persuade Mike to let me have an affair with RAF, and only then would I try to save the marriage. I recommended therapy. He was okay. Things didn't go so well at our first appointment with a counselor. The counselor was a woman, but she shared Mike's inability to understand my inability to resist Raf's chew. I suppose I was hoping she would be more sympathetic, and maybe even side with me. So, Mrs. McGowan, do your wishes really mean nothing to you? She said after my story. No, he means everything to me, but that's different. I said, I've never experienced anything like this before. You're a woman. You've experienced excitement. Well, that's how it is. But it's so much stronger. Almost as if I had been drugged. I commented. Just by observing her expression, I could see she didn't believe my story. Mike just seemed perplexed. Men are often accused of thinking with their small brains, but women are just as guilty of doing it. If today's divorce statistics are to be believed, the advisor assured my wife, yes, love at first sight exists, but most people know they can choose to ignore it. You chose to give in to your base desires. I found it incredible that this woman accused me of lacking self-control. It was a bit like she had treated me with the question that ultimately led to our divorce. Is the one she asked me after that, if Mike could forgive you and take you back. Do you think you would be able to resist your physical urges and remain faithful to your husband? Oh my. I hoped this woman would support me without even daring to answer the question. I sat frozen in fear. Mike knew I was lying better than any lie detector. I love you, Mike. Please, you can't help me. I don't love him, but I have to have him. This is the best sex of my life. Don't ask me to give it up when I finish talking. I was inconsolable. I glanced at Mike, hoping to catch a glimpse. His resolve was weakening. He had told me he loved me. Their eyes were lifeless. Nothing at all. I love you so, Trass. But I won't tolerate you cheating on me. And I'll never forgive you for the hurt you've done to me. I'm sorry. I wasn't man enough for you. You're way manlier than I need you to be, Mikey. Unannounced, I love you. I don't like if I gave up on him, and whatever it takes for us to be together, I will do it. Please keep trying to help us. It's not the case yet. He replied, Don't blame me. You left us after the first time you slept with that jerk. I didn't realize you were so self-centered. You're the center of attention, and you don't love me as much as I love you. I was writing RAF Co. Even a stud in my room weeks after our last session with the counselor. I didn't know if Mike was watching me, but that didn't matter to me anymore. Back at my office, I contacted RAF, who I had met on campus the day before. He was more than happy to set up a midday meeting. No doubt the sex was superb. 6 months later, the divorce was final. I had countless sex sessions with RAF throughout this period. Each time the SE was extraordinary. My Achilles heel was him. Despite my feelings for Mike, I was falling for RAF. I couldn't resist taking him because of that. I realized I would never hear from Mike again. He was too little love to give me RAF. Mike, if you love me? Really? Said Tracy, her voice full of delusions of grandeur. I couldn't believe she had really tried to convince me to let her keep her lover while staying married to me. Forget about your girlfriend. We were never going to stay married. If I could be a naive cuckold, I certainly wasn't going to be an ignorant cuckold. I was very surprised that the marriage counselor we met didn't share her utopian vision. Our first session was a disaster. She almost called my wife a whore. She informed my wife that our meetings would end after the 4th session, assuring her that she supported my position and that I wouldn't change my mind when the counselor announced that therapy was ending. Soon, I was afraid TR would lose his balance and collapse on the floor. None of my daughters knew if Tracy had asked them to intervene, but they did their best. When I informed my youngest daughter, she sobbed, "Dad, you are tearing the family apart." "No, darling, I'm not tearing the family apart. Your mother has done. I'm just making it legal," I replied. She frowned and scowled. It was clear she was thinking about it a lot. "I guess you're right, Dad," she finally muttered. RAF. I felt uncomfortable about upsetting Tracy's husband, but I preferred to ignore her relationship problems. We had an incredible physical connection, and the sex was almost supernatural. But I knew she loved this guy too. Of course, I would have given in to her desires if she had wanted to. He is very seated. But I guess I can't blame him if he doesn't want to be cuckolded. My goal is not to ask why, but to make love or die trying after Mike filed for divorce. Tracy avoided me for weeks after he refused to back down and win her back. We resumed our affair. Now that Mike was gone, she started paying more attention to myself physically, and things got better. It was with Tracy that I had the best sex of my life. I never imagined our relationship would last this long. At 45, marriage was not in her plans. I had always planned on having my own family, and she had 2 grown children. In the worst-case scenario, she had committed such a disgusting act to the person she claimed to love more than anything in the world. I continued to try to find the right one, but I refrained from talking about it with Tracy. She had a lot on her mind after losing Mike. Discovering Lucy Ralston about a year after Tracy's divorce changed everything we got on. Well, straight away, she was 24 years old, short brown hair, and a slender figure typical of a dancer for a while. I hid Lucy from Traces, but after about Mo, I admitted her. I was aware that my actions had offended Traces, but I didn't think she loved me anyway. Although we have a strong physical connection, our emotional relationship was that of great friends. It was my responsibility to inform Tracy that Lucy and I had decided to end our relationship, but I left my husband for you. Tracy sobs as I break the news to her. No, You didn't leave him. You left your husband to sleep with me. There was never an us. There was only sex, fantastic, and it was your choice. But it's not my choice. My choice is to have a wife and a family. I replied. Tracked the news that RAF was going to end our sexual relationship and be with Lucy upset me hearing him say, "But I left my husband for you." Brought tears to my eyes. The expression on Raf's face was one of pure sympathy. "No, you didn't leave your husband, you left your husband to have sex with me," he said. Despite everything I knew he was right. The humiliation of my children upon learning the truth followed. After our breakup, Mike didn't mince his words. He accused me of having had several liations with other men for the best sex of your mother's life. Our kids were upset, but they grew up and moved on a year and a half later. I looked even worse when I told them RA had left me to start a family with a younger woman, even though I didn't specifically tell them not to. I really hoped he wouldn't tell their dad. I admit I was a little reluctant to share this new chapter in my life over Christmas break. My eldest daughter casually asked if my kids were going to meet my boyfriend. I told her we broke up, so you gave up a quarter-century of love with Dad for a few years of sex with a younger man. Oh wait, I'm sorry. A few years of the best sex of your life. My child screamed, words failed me. I looked at the floor. Downside compared to losing Mike, Raf wasn't so bad. Even though RAF was a fantastic sex partner, Mike was my one and only love in my world. At least I could look forward to making sex several times a week, even though it was painful coming home to an empty apartment every day after work. I had nothing left when RA was around. That's why I was so open to meetings at first, I guess, because the loneliness was so terrible. Surprisingly, the majority of men who showed interest were in their 30s. Some even in their 20s. Maybe this old lady didn't seem so horrible for her 47 years. Many men were nice to be around, but none were as good as my ex. It might be due to my prolonged absence from the dating scene. But I couldn't help but notice that, especially among young men, expectations had considerably changed over the last 25 years. It seemed that if sex wasn't planned on the first date, there wouldn't be a second. Not that I'm too sensitive, but I wasn't looking to have sex with just anyone, either. The sex that did happen was generally enjoyable, and my partners were generally satisfied. They were more interested in sex with the older ones, but the younger ones were very attracted to my ample breasts. Yet the vast majority of the sex was made up of clothes. I guess I never dated long enough to engage in passionate lovemaking. Oh, how I longed for the days of making love when I spoke to the kids and asked about Mike. I tried my best to be discreet. I thought there was no way he was dating anyone, so I held on to hope to win him back. The chances of him going out with me were slim, but I still didn't see why he wouldn't go out with other women who had divorced me if he went out with me. Our marriage lasted 23 years, but for that to happen, I knew I would have to take the lead. I wanted to ask Mike if he would be interested in meeting up for coffee at some point, and that's what I did a few months later when I called and got a response. "I know I hurt you by what I did, and I'm sorry, but I really would like us to be friends, have coffee together, and eat together. Sometimes I really miss sitting with you and chatting." "I guess we could do that, Tracy," he said, with a hint of approval reserved. "I miss your company, and I think I'm in a much better place now than It was the following Saturday we would meet up for coffee. Mike, when Tracy walked into the Starbucks where we had planned to meet. She had been absolutely gorgeous 2 years since we last saw each other. The passing of time didn't seem to have fazed her. She didn't seem to have aged, and her weight seemed to have remained constant since we last met. Her hair was cut to her shoulders, and the fitted pullover she was wearing showed off her ample chest. The fact that she was practically makeup-free only served to kill her natural beauty. I stood up to greet her, but I froze, not knowing whether to kiss her or not. She rushed into my room, kissed me on the face, and hugged me tightly so she could answer my question. I kissed her back honestly. I wanted to know why she hadn't been taken away by someone, yet at this point, adorably, she blushed. "He seems not. Everyone shares your impeccable taste," she replied with a smile to refocus me. I glanced down. We each received a pastry with our coffee order, as did our marital conversations. We covered a wide range of topics as the conversation was very interesting. We treated ourselves to a second cup of Starbucks overbrewed caffeine. I told Tracy it was fun, honey, as we got up to leave. What if we had lunch together next time? Her wide eyes showed me I had taken her by surprise with my invitation in a whisper. She murmured, "Absolutely, that would be great. Give me your phone and I will put my new number in it after weeks of waiting." I contacted her to arrange lunch this year. Excuse me since my divorce from Tracy. It had been over 25 years since I had been on a date of any kind. I tried my best not to worry about the public, despite the crushing heartbreak caused me by the way Rossi had treated me. But what she did broke my heart, and since the divorce, I have avoided women like the plague. One Saturday afternoon, Tracy and I had a lovely meal at our favorite Italian restaurant. She had high hopes that I would invite her to my flat after lunch, but I think her expectations were unrealistic. After greeting him with a kiss, I walked him to his car in the car park, and then to my own car. Over the next 12 months, we had several enjoyable lunches, as I had more control over the lunches. I limited them too. That the next step, in my opinion, is the afterspur that led. It was totally out of my league. Traces over the years, Mike must have wised up. He always seemed to enjoy our time together, but he never brought up the idea to go to dinner with me. I eventually expected him to come and see me and just spend the night with me. I figured I had a chance of winning him back if I could just shock his name once, even though I knew he wasn't dating anyone. All he did was never give me a chance. Going to lunch at Yop isn't exactly a way to wind down for the night. Monday was here, and I started dating him again. I guess I should have accepted that I was likely to be little more than a statistic when it came to the dating scene. Mike. I went 5 years without dating, because Tracy was such a mess. Lunches with Tracy were never dates in my book, but I know she thought they were. I felt a presence to my right as I was browsing the different brands of tequila in my usual liquor store looking for a new tequila. It seems she was also engaged in the same business as me. I figured her attractive appearance meant she would get something out of my wealth of experience in spirits. Say I was just trying to be cordial. "Are you planning on sipping the tequila or mixing it with water?" I told her with a charming smile. I never blacken a good tequila. I drink my tequila like I drink my coffee, straight with nothing in it, the woman replied. "Margaritas are fine for parties, but when I drink for real, I don't mix the cow." A keen observer to my knowledge. No woman drinks tequila straight. This was the first time I turned around to look at this woman. Oh no, she's drinking a glass of tequila. Pure, and she is beautiful. She has no ring on her left or right hand. She looked a little younger than me. Her dark wavy hair, not shoulder length, was messy. Her pale complexion contrasted with her dazzling blue eyes, just like me. I thought she was Irish until I heard her voice. I didn't know I was looking. It was only after she spoke that I realized she was asking me a question. She said subtle, very subtle, as I refocused on the concrete reality I am aware of having colored. "I apologize." I was completely absorbed in the moment, and I armed myself with a dozen brands of tequila, and a beautiful woman who knows how to drink this stuff doesn't happen often in my world. She gave me a crooked smile. The rest of her speech gave me the impression that she was going to continue. "And what world is it? Likes tequila?" "Snop," she asked. I whispered. "Lawserville, United States, madam." She asked. "Madam? Did you just call me madam?" With a tone of pure amazement. "I look like your mother or what?" "I am sorry, it's a matter of manners, it's my parents' fault." "But no, you don't look like my mother." "I loved my mother to death, but she wasn't. And not as beautiful as you on your best days." The fact that sentence came out of my mouth seemed incredible to me. The idea made me wince. Her expression changed from surprise to a mischievous smile. In the meantime, I had examined what seemed to me to be an unusually slim and shapely figure for a woman her age. Why does Laserville like Keela's snop? If we want to be polite, you don't seem to have a problem getting a date or two. "I haven't been on a date in 5 years since I divorced my cheating wife." And I whispered. She put on an embarrassed expression and said, "Oh, sorry about that." For several seconds, there was an awkward silence. Luckily, she had more talent than me to get out of the impasse. Returning to the tequila, she asked, "So what do you think I'm a big fan of?" "Don Donge Blanco. And I also like the En Tequil Santo de Gufier Samyagar," replied. But if it's a really special occasion, then go for the Don Julio 1942. It's very expensive, but it's really a good product to the question. "What do you think is expensive?" She elaborated. "One due 85 for a bottle." I replied, "It's primo." I took her nod to mean we were done talking. I picked up a bottle of Santau from the shelf. I then wondered what was going on and held out my hand in response, and Mike McGowan. What if we did a little tequila tasting next door? Would it help you make a better decision? I suggested, giving her my most sincere expression. After another twisted smile, she looked at me for a long time before accepting my invitation. 2 hours later, we went to the nearby bar and sipped a green tequila, as I didn't want to. That we were arrested for drunk driving. I made sure to buy a few servings of snacks coming out of the pub. I got Rosmart's phone number. The events of the following week unfolded in my mind in a way that words cannot describe. I had to call this stunning woman to set up a date, but I was overjoyed to have gotten her number. I last went on a date just before the American Revolution. Oh no, it occurred to me that we could go out to dinner, see if I could find a place where I could roller skate and a bowling alley. I felt nauseous. I was well paid and had a respectable job. I felt like most people liked me. Even though I was politically indifferent on dates, I was always up to date with current events. I found myself sweating a lot. I realized that one thing remained constant. Women completely dominate the dating world without their knowledge. But I didn't need to threaten her with a gun to get her number. That was probably the best for me. My inner monologue continued for days, and I'm sure it could have continued for a long time, if it weren't for the intervention of fate that came in the form of Anortino, who I met in the office hallway. I ran into Anna. While I hadn't yet decided what to do about Rose, I apologized, grabbing her arms to stop her from falling as she tripped over her 2-inch heels. I know I'm not very tall, but I don't think you would have noticed me if I had all these fancy accessories, Anna told me. As I helped her up a problem, I would say, Anna and my youngest daughter have about the same age. Sometimes we would have a conversation, and I would often give her fatherly advice about today's young people. She was also my personal advisor. Anna would meet me in person and explain things to me in terms that made sense to my 50-year-old brain, if I wanted an explanation about something that was passed down from generation to generation. And I didn't want to call them my children and just mumble something like, yeah. Actually, I probably came across as a weak clown. Anna stared at me as if she was deciphering some kind of message. Her smile is characteristically beautiful. It was normal that I was troubled. Her voice was so melodious, as if she was singing. Would this problem have to do with a girl? A woman whispering? I sort of answered, yes, I think. So after looking at me for what seemed like an eternity, she finally decided, okay, you can talk to me about it after work at Murphy's, and I don't want you to yell at me when I get my glass of foam, or you'll have to figure it out yourself. She said later that day when we ended up at the Murphy's. I fumbled and stuttered as I talked about Rose. Anna is sitting across from me. Her expression was clearly amused. So you haven't dated anyone since your divorce 5 years ago? No one. That's amazing. I knew you were kind of a loser, but I didn't realize you'd moved the needle to the pathetic sans port at TL. Anna was right, even though the ridiculous R made me wince. Plus, I could see she still tried to be nice when she talked to me. How long ago did she give you her number? Are we still in the same month year? I warned Micey half-jokingly. But seriously, if you keep talking smart, I'll put you on my lap. That was 5 days ago. Oh, that could be fun for both of us, she chirped back. Not her, but one of us went all red seriously. Mike, what's the problem? You're not a throne. You have lots of atu in hand called Anna. Anna spent the next half hour telling me about the things she and her friends did on their dates. I resisted the urge to pull out a padnes and take notes. She asked me at one point, do you know how to dance the Pope? Does he have 3 left feet? I replied. I take that as a name. Then, women really like it when a man takes them dancing. It's a bit physical. It gets the cheech thing moving, she said with a big smile. It's true. I always thought it was some kind of urban legend, and I say it's 100% true. It's a bit like foreplay. She said, there. And I said, covering my ears. She looked at me, then smiled again. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to have a condom on you. You can never be too prepared, she said, looking me straight in the eye. Yes, Mom, I replied. I called Rose when I got home that evening and set up an appointment for the following Saturday. Anna told me not to spend too much time talking about my previous marriage, but to answer honestly any questions Rose asked me about it. I wasn't very comfortable talking about what had happened to a relative stranger. But Rose was very empathetic. She then told me her story, which included a 15-year marriage that ended when she caught her husband in bed with one of their neighbors, Tracy's. The physical pain of the syphilis I had contracted was nowhere near as bad as the humiliation I suffered in my doctor's office. Don't get me wrong, the doctor and the 2 nurses I dealt with were completely professional, but I could see they were dismayed to be dealing with me. The situation didn't improve when I listed 6 different men as my recent sexual partners, so they would be informed, "Shit." If notification, I heard one nurse whisper to the other after she had first looked through my profile. It's probably a good thing she isn't 25. I probably would have ripped her face off if she had said that out loud to me, but I have to admit it sounded really bad. When I heard the comment, I hadn't thought about it too much, but I think I had been enjoying my single life for the last few years when RAF dumped me after Mike's divorce. I think I've gone a bit crazy. I think I may have been looking for someone to replace Mike and Raf, but if that was the case, I couldn't even come close. How do I replace this that Mike and I had for 23 years, and how to replace the incredible connection I had with RAF? I don't know, maybe in my mind I was overcompensating for quality. I never really thought about how many men I was sleeping with, until I had to take my partners into account. No doubt most of my barback partners were stupid and irresponsible. It's not like I was a drunken slut. I was always sober enough to know what I was doing. And I always chose men who looked clean and well-groomed, I guess. As the old story goes, when you sleep with someone, you also sleep with everyone they've slept with recently. I never thought, idiot, at least I didn't have to tell anyone else about my problem. Mike, Rose, and I got married about a year after our first date. We still had problems, trust, but we overcame them with love and the help of a very good counselor. I pushed Rose gently, and we both lay on our sides facing each other for a while because of the effort after 25 years of marriage. And when we were both 75 years old, making love once a week was enough. We still spent 10 minutes kissing and cuddling before falling asleep. To say that Rose was my savior is no exaggeration. After divorcing Tracy, I was lost. I didn't even know how to date someone. She let me feel my way sometimes, literally, and we grew up together. Even though I wouldn't have bet money on it, I found a soul. Sure, I will grow old with stage fright. I was a little more wary in choosing my partners once I got back on the road after my problem. Part of it was probably due to menopause. Another part was probably due to the fact that even though I still looked good in my skin when I hit my 50s, 20 and 30-year-olds weren't looking my way anymore. In fact, as there are a lot more single women available than men in their 40s and 50s. The competition was pretty tough in her age brackets too. If someone had asked me this question a few years ago, I would have said it was a settled deal. I was going to grow old with my husband before Mike because I was an idiot. Things didn't work out, so I played around with Mike way too much. I mistook his kindness for weakness. I thought he loved me so much, he would at least forgive me for my transgression a few years ago. I moved into a senior home. My old house was way too big for me as a single person. I see my children and grandchildren every few months. It took several years for the relationship I had with my children to get somewhat back to normal. Mike and I's relationship remained friendly, although we stopped having lunch together after I realized it wouldn't bring me closer to him. It took several years, but Mike finally started dating again after several years of hermitage. I admit I'm jealous of the way he looks at Rose when the whole family gets together for the holidays. I can't help but notice the adoring looks, the cute way they interact. It makes me want to puke. It should be me. Was it worth it? I wonder. I never like the answer.